Badass sunrise guaning right now. Yeah, it's like pretty cloudy, but like I'd say it's more undercast than over. Anyways, looks fucking gnarly. Is my point. Hi, what's up? I'm Elliot, and I'm attempting a rather ambitious expression this morning with a bit of a time limit because I'm having my nephew over today. My favorite nephew. I only have two. It's wicked. But to be fair, it has less to do with him being my nephew and more to do with the fact that he is just this awesome little dude. He's two and he makes me so happy. Anyways, I'm gonna endeavor to be succinct enough that I can finish on a whim. Plus, whatever, man. Time's a construct, which is to say, it can be rolled with. And if I felt like resistance to doing it, rather through practice, by developing an awareness of what resistance feels like to what and where and why, you can navigate it. And so timing is a sensitive thing for me because I've always kind of rebelled against it. So in that regard, I trust that if I'm doing it, it's the right time. What does that have to do with anything, Elliot? Are you just gonna do what you do, just ramble and shit? Well, yes. I like to think that I'm consistent. And I like to think that you think I'm consistent too. Thank you. And maybe that was a ramble because you can understand how that is relevant. Firstly, to astrology and making any system of context, like identical context. Oh, there's going to be hand movements, so let me just, yeah, that'll do. I'll say this now. Take it to mean as much as you can because I'm not going to emphasize it. I emphasize it in everything that I kind of try and express, but nothing is meaningful unless you ascribe a meaning to it. And if you don't ascribe a meaning to it, and it occurs to you, then the meaning is being ascribed by someone or something, and it's delivering you. So, firstly, and even just most importantly, astrology was it like energy design, I think was one. What else do I use? Mostly astrology, but I use all of them. I'm a big fan of Western astrology, tropical, geocentric. And I'll explain a little bit what each thing is kind of mean, if that could be helpful. So the most common astrology that we're all kind of familiar with in the West is, you guessed it, Western astrology. Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, yada, yada, yada. 12 zodiac signs as constellations that are fixed in our night sky as the planets kind of travel through them. But how is anything fixed in the universe? Well, that's a good question. and one best to keep open, like open-ended, until you can ride a star or find a star and be like, oh wow, we're not moving. You know, science, and especially astronomy and geography, or rather, not geography, geology, are heavily weighted towards deception and fucking with what you perceive as to be your place in the grand scheme of things. So, yeah. And then, because I mentioned it, geocentric is Earth is fixed. The astrology is where all the stars and the planets are in relation to the Earth. So your sun sign, for instance, where the Earth was at the time of my birth, the sun was traveling through the constellation of Gemini. In the geocentric model, because it's all models, but everything's a model. That's meaning when you can create your own model of anything and everything, then you are the master of the design of your life. And it's your like birthright. One moment. Thank you. Voila. I'm back. Thanks for your patience. Right. So in the geocentric model, the sun, for instance, was traveling through the constellation of Gemini. Now, what's really interesting and not often known, I actually learned about it in a book on astrology that I read. It was written in the early 1900s. And it's just a recognition where the sun is. If you go across it to whatever sign you're in, that's where the earth is. So that's like, I would say, largely not even overlooked, it's like not looked. But while when I was born, the sun was in Gemini and the earth was through Sagittarius, for instance. It's cool. And then you can kind of do that with all of the planets. What does it mean to have your Earth and fuck, whatever you want it to mean. That's the point. Or at least that's the fundamental point. There are better and more reasons that we'll get into, because consciousness is established in like physics. It's established in reality, or whatever the real is. And then the horizon, the ascendant, which is on the left side of your natal chart, for instance, which north, south, east, west is actually, it's flipped. So that's east. I don't know, relative to my view. And then the descendant is would be where the sun is setting. The horizon. That makes me think. Whatever. I'll do that noodling on my own. While we're on the Western, the relevancy of the ascendant. How my computer is receiving information right now is light being transmitted, right? Not light being bounced off me. That's stupid. And fake signs. Light isn't a thing that is emitted, but whatever. I don't want to confuse you. This is moving through that, and it's going through the air or whatever, and then it's traveling through blah, blah, blah to get to you. Okay? It's information. That makes sense. My voice, you're not sitting next to me. And even if you were, I'm not in your head, right? The sound, the compressive waves, the frequency, the vibration is moving through a medium and being interpreted vis-a-vis our structures and the models that we ascribe the meaning to. Okay. The point that I want to make with that is how important light is, truly, as a medium for information. That was a little complex. So just think of like radio or Wi-Fi. It's like, how can like the sun have information? Well, the same way that a cell tower. It's all emitting waves. But like the sun's stupid. It doesn't have sentience. It's like, no. In fact, that's lazy thinking. Right? Because you have sentience, you have thoughts. And I'm not saying that you're a sun. I'm not saying you're not a sun. But when you go out on a sunny day, you're receiving your perception of the weather. You can smell when rain's coming. You can tell what time of day it is by virtue of the kind of light that the sun is expressing. So it's information. And why the ascendant is so potential is as the sun transits the sky, the light is transmitted through the atmosphere. The atmosphere is complex. And by composition is distributed differently by virtue of like the angle that the sun is making with the planet. If you think of, like old school TVs, if you put like a magnet up to the screen, it kind of like warbled the screen, right? Because what's old school TVs, they use cathode rays, which is just like literally like electrons being blasted against the screen. So like light, and the magnet attracts light because like electromagnetism, light, electromagnetism, same thing. In that way, the Earth and the sun have that kind of same relationship. And when the light is coming towards the Earth at at like the angle that's closest to flat. So like say this is the like the plane, the horizontal plane of the Earth, and the ascendant descendant line in your natal chart. We'll say the atmosphere is up, and the other side of the Earth is down in relation to the light. As whatever light is coming in closest to the ground is not being interfered with by the greater densities of like the upper tropospheres, stratospheres, ionospheres, yada, yada, yada. Which is why, to make it kind of relatable, sunrises and sunsets can be so beautiful. Because the atmosphere is less dense, so longer waveforms, red colors, orange colors, even like the magentas, the pinks, the red, they get refracted I'm trying to like, I don't want it to make it too sciencey or physical, but whatever. I think that, well, I know that you're getting it. Why is the sky blue? I'm just using this example. The sky is blue because blue is a shorter waveform. The visible spectrum, it goes from long to short. Gamma, really short. Infrared, I guess, is really long. Really long travels long distances but goes slowly. Really short travels really short distances but moves quickly. So as light enters our atmosphere, it is refracted against the water molecules, the oxygen, the nitrogen, the argon, and then the multitude of other compositions, carbon dioxide. And the longer waveforms kind of get split. So what meets our eyes, when our eyes are not trained, are all those waveforms split, which ends up being the bluer hues. This is in part why astrology is deeply relevant to the truth of our being, because everything's information, and the pollution of light transmission in our world is like a chief culprit to our collective ineptitude. So the light coming in at the horizon, if we think of north and south being the poles where the forces are strongest, they're like less pulled apart, somewhere in the middle and furthest away from, right? So my rising is in Sagittarius because my sun is in the seventh house. Just relating the Earth and the sun kind of analogy that I used before. Because I didn't mention that my rising was in Sagittarius, but here it is. Stars are suns. Planets are suns. People are suns. It's all light. Thank you for telling me that. I do. I'm going to look into that and see what I can do about it. I really appreciate you telling me this, Stacey. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. The light being emitted by the stars at the horizon at the time of your birth is the collection of light that is traversing the surface of the planet most potently by direction. It's what's flying underneath the radar, as they say, the interference of the light pollution, as well as just like the atmosphere. And it's streaming in the direction that the sun rises and sets, that the solar system is moving in. So that's why the rising sign isn't necessarily like evident, especially in your early life, like the sun is, because the sun's right here, it's really close. And the sun can be looked at as that, as like your ever present. The moon is the past, and I'll get to that. And your rising sign is the potential. Because as you go through life, as you go through the solar system of your beingness, yeah, that information we'll say in like a 12-hour period from the time that you're born and you're ascendant, in like 12 hours, there's like a whole story there. And then if we zoom out, your ascendant can be like that being like the microcosm, the blueprint of 120 years at a different time scale, i.e. like our life that we would go through. It's all been imprinted. It's like, this is the potential with the relationship of all these stars and all the suns. And I'll get to this next, I guess. And really where like the human noosphere is, where the culture is, where our genetic connections are. Because all of it is light traveling through time. All of it is information traveling through time. All of it is patterns and cycles of being, of evolution, of like existence being itself purposefully through time. So like imagine like at death, they say your whole life flashes before your eyes. Like at birth, a blueprint of your best potential flashes before your eyes. Okay. And that's a useful model. Now, I'm going to tackle the great lazy lie of our times, which is like, what? It's astrology is nothing. It's not. First, And I'll say it simply there, just to be like kind and inclusive of conditioning in our world to intelligent information. There's different ways that you can look at things, and how you look at anything is true. So I've expressed the kind of electromagnetic way of looking at things. Now I'm going to look at, I want to talk to the cyclical linking, patterning that is more like social, cultural identity. And I'll keep kind of using, I guess, me as an example. I was born in 85. My parents were born in the early 60s. My one set of grandparents was born in the 20s. My other set of grandparents was born in the 40s. The grandparents that I had that were born in the 20s grew up with influences most potently from the turn of the century, right? They were heavily impressioned by the world wars, the 30s and the 40s, and then made most of their choices really from the 50s, until the time of their passing. But their whole life, what I just told you, those sets of circumstances didn't arise out of nowhere. They weren't random. Why do you ever fight with anyone? Even when you say something, when you can say something, you're fighting for no reason. It's like, no, it's not no reason. It might be a bad reason, but it's being incited by something. Their whole lives, all that navigation would be entirely different if the events of the mid 1600s to the mid to the till the end of the 1700s were relatively that much different. That's well before their time, but their time got there by virtue of what was achieved before then, and what wasn't achieved, the trials, the tribulations. Now, that's like a grander scale. Let's bring it down to yours and I's every day. Say you have a goal, an aim, a project, something that you want to improve. At first you don't succeed, try again. Well, yeah, that's everything. So you're going to make mistakes. You're going to succeed. There's going to be another, if you continue, there's going to be the effects of the causes of your first mistakes, your first successes. And there's a forward moving cyclical pattern that's highly rational and clear to see how the things are connected. Agree? One of the most manipulative conditionings of like the present enslavement regime that we're moving from, because it's inherently limited and we are not, is the conditioning of our perception of time to only think in terms of our own lifetime, to think in terms of like long isn't even our whole life, right? If something's going to happen a year from now, you're like, oh, I want it to happen now. When we think of society, and it's mostly just doom and gloom, everything is set in like 20 years, 30 years. The world's gonna, all the icebergs are gonna melt in 20 years. The when I was in the 80s, like it was like acid rain. It's like all the forests are gonna wither away in the next 10 years. No shit's happening. And we live in terms of what can only be accomplished in our own lifetime. Because if you want people to die, and that is what has been a goal, it's obviously, because look at all the death, the meaningless death, or the like serving else death. We don't think of our children. We are all our goals, all of like our societal goals, like the Canadian whatever politics voting bullshit. It's the first year that I'm not voting because I know, because I vote up until now I voted not because I believe in the system, but because it was a representation of my intention. And this year I'm decidedly not voting, but I'm consistent. Intention is everything. And I'm actively with you, or eventually with you, creating a better world. Not just up here, although that's where everything starts and finishes, but tangibly. Bye, Stacey. Thank you for joining with me for a bit. Shit, why did I say that? Anyways, let's just go back to the relevancy of cycles. Oh, yeah. Their campaigns are all in thought, like the goal of our nations are considered in these smallest little plots. We have no 1,000-year goals. We have no 100-year goals as a humanity. And even though time and our history has been heavily manipulated and distorted, even in the lies, we can agree that we've been around for a while. So if we've been around for a while, and we were stupider then, and we certainly assume we're going to be around for a while longer, except when it's useful to scare people into thinking we're all going to die tomorrow, then why don't we have collective humanity, like aims and goals, where this is what we could hope to achieve progressively as a journey over the next 1,000 years. Because we're not going to be able to see it. that's not right. Because here we are today, living the goals, the aims, the plans of 1,000-year past, 10,000-year past, 100,000-year past, 1,000,000 years past. In that way, if we take it the most secularly, any esoteric or even like true physicianal consciousness science, I hate that word, but I haven't figured another one yet that can still be relatable and mean the same thing. Just thinking in terms of markings of cycles, what it takes, I think, 12 years. I want to say 7. Anyways, I'm being distracted. It takes like however long for Mars to rotate around the Earth. It takes however long for Venus, for Jupiter, for Saturn, for Neptune, for Uranus, for Pluto. And just like our day has a rhythm, just like our lives, our reactions have a kind of response time, so does our culture. So does technology. One of the greatest books that I've read, rather young, it's called Cosmos and Psyche. It's a Western scholar's scrutinized examination of astrology, basically like in whatever, like the 70s, being somewhat of an acclaimed scholar, looked at astrology and was like, I call bullshit. And so, but unlike just, and he didn't stop there. He's like, I'm not going to prove it. I'm going to prove it wrong. And that's how you find out anything. Anybody can prove anything right. It's that cognitive bias, which they love to throw out, like that loves to trend. It's like, if you want to believe something, you're going to find what you want to believe to make it true. It's like, well, yeah, and that can be positive, but it goes hand in hand. It's simultaneous with not proving it wrong, proving yourself wrong. Because if you can't prove yourself wrong, and that's the highest threshold for any truth, right? It's easy to tell people what's right and wrong. It's easy to prove you're right, you're wrong. But when you yourself can't get past the fact that's like, fuck, I've tried my best to prove this wrong to myself, because it's whatever, it's my desire, it's the aim, and I, despite my best efforts, I can't. Well, then I can at least be sure in and of myself and my own efforts and the integrity of my own honesty to myself that I can know what I know so far. So he went out to like disprove his own perspective on the relevancy of astrology and couldn't fucking do it. And the way that he, because he's like a philosopher and historian, he went through our collective history and just noticed, it's like when these planets are making an aspect to each other in the Earth and the Sun, these types of collective activities, like the printing press and the French Revolution and the I don't want to speak up my ass. It's been a while since I've read it. It's like 1640s, 1790s, 1850s, 1960s, 2020s. Like, although it wasn't 2020 yet, I think it was written around the turn of the millennium. It's like there's a noticeable pattern of collective behavior. And another way of looking at it is like our transition through biological maturity. Right? It's like childhood you can expect, and then teenage years you can expect, and then there's like young adult years you can expect, and they're not set in stone. If you don't take a large enough scale, you might mistake their meaning by not incorporating things that you don't like really wouldn't you wouldn't notice. I don't want to get distracted. And again, just stepping away from all kinds of esoteria. It's like when there's a revolution, there's like the emotional, mental, cultural, technological states that precede it, right? Frustration, angst, suppression, like a rise, a kind of a rebellion despite maybe a violence, you know, which is maybe preceded by an accomplishment, a kind of achievement of what we would hope to be our goal. You know, it's like, oh, well, now we have a new president, we have a new king, we have a new this, we have a new that. We adhere to the system, we use the system to bring about change, yay, and then a certain amount of time passes where it maybe gets worse. Or bringing back down to like our lively scales, it's like, oh, the thing that you were chasing isn't making you happy. So maybe it's not the thing that you thought was going to make you happy is what's going to make you happy. So you either do nothing and you go through it like with that kind of cycle, or you do something and you do another cycle. And that can be like attributed or related to like a Pluto time scale, which is like the grandest time scale, or a Martian, you know, just depending on where we all are. So whenever you're born as a direct result in line of all the influences that came before you. And that's highly relevant, even in and of itself. Never mind the fact that consciousness is ubiquitous. And not biologically emergent. Rather, biology is emergent from consciousness. We think of in terms of our tiny life scales. perceptions, which is the only thing that limits our scales of perception from being grander and open to other aspects of being, of else, of other, whose timescales can look at 1,000 years as a day. I'm going to leave it at that for now, because I've just decided I'm going to make this a multi-parter so that it can just be more easily digestible, and I can be more singularly focused in each segment. And this was a good primer, because if you only watch this one, then you've got all the camaraderie that you need to continue to create your own meaning. Not arbitrarily, but justly. And in that regard, I'll open up a last invitation to go beyond not just Western astrology. So something that's been super relevant to me, especially in my shifting personal paradigms, was a Japanese astrology. It's not even really astrology, which is why I want to introduce it. It's nine star key, KI, or depends on what you hear. Just a model of one's universe. Chinese astrology is quite popular. Vedic astrology is less popular to the general populace, but it's got a strong representation in, I would say, the present community of higher realms of consciousness awareness in community. The Mayan astrology, especially in regards to patterns and cycles, is awesome. There's the Solkin calendar, which is what we're all familiar with, I think, the most familiar, although it's not the one that's most often consulted, at least in my experience in this community. Instead, that dream spell, I would say like postmodern representation of that it's like the galactic signature and things like that, and the 13 moon calendar. Western astrology, there's geocentric and there's heliocentric, and that's super interesting because that'll give you your chart with the sun as the center and where all the planets are in relation to the sun. And that's fascinating. So go beyond Western astrology, I invite you. And then go beyond all the descriptions. Go beyond what I'm telling you. Go beyond what Gemini is supposed to mean. Go beyond what Sagittarius is supposed to mean. Right? Go beyond, more deeply into you, into what you notice can be meaningful to you. When you make up meaning, it's super lazy to express making up meaning as um, as self-righteous. It's like self-righteous to be like, you can't just say things mean to. No, that's you being an asshole and like just lazy, which I can't abide. Not that kind of lazy. I'm down with like chills. Because all of us are channels for information, and patterns are everything. Patterns are pathways. Patterns are maps. Patterns are stories. Write your own. But if you want Gemini, which is like the air sign, there's a rapidity, humor, a lightness, a kind of removed from a sense of gravity. There's a seriousness, a disconnection with emotions, blah, 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 blah. If you want that to mean instead deeply emotional, quiet, dark, because that's the meaning that you want to attribute to it, you're more than welcome to. You'll be hard pressed to be able to connect your meaning to others. So, and that's the relevancy of community. We're all creators of our own reality. But if you create a reality that nobody else is invited to, that nobody else knows about, and is so foreign to everyone else's that it's unfamiliar and so scary, and then also doesn't offer a kind of beneficent opportunity, then your world's going to be pretty empty. Which is why, you can go to astrology sites, you can go like see astrology readings, you can go to tarot readings, which is why astrology and all of these things are relevant, because they are collective patterns. They are our choices represented. It's so funny. We live our lives. We generally, me, not the fuck at all, by the tick-tock of the clock. 9:43. It's gonna this at noon, this at that, this and that. We love to be like to look at our calendars and be like, ooh, this day's coming, birthday's coming, Christmas is coming, long weekend, just weekend, crazy work. I'm gonna plan. I've got a plan to make a business, so I'm gonna schedule my planning. But if we use the stars as a calendar, if we use the stars and the planets as a clock, it's just markers for cycles and meaning, then we're crazy. But we can make up a measure, i.e. the clock, the calendar. We can make one up that's not only not based on anything as deep and far-reaching as the stars, but it only takes a little bit of looking into to realize how destructive they are to our awareness on so many levels, and to see that you can't hide all the manipulation, right? You can't hide. It's like, oh, around this time, the Romans ... So go beyond meaning, but don't go beyond humanity. Yours. If I were to like suggest, just out of my heart, try and choose things that like bring people together. You don't have to, but wouldn't that be nice? Let's let that be our day goal, week goal, monthly goal, year goal. Oh, hi, nephew Miles. How's it going, buddy? I love your hoodie. Oh, bless you, kitty. All right, I'm out. That's my cue. I love you. Have a nice everything. Bye.
And your shoes off. What?
Bless you
We're
too.
done.
Yeah.